Some, older, like you have sometimes elderly will walk away from their house and get lost or whatever. And that was what they were going with. And the family's like, no, 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 you don't understand. She can't even walk to the mailbox. Right. So immediately from the beginning, they didn't even realize the seriousness of it, which, when you're working these cases, every second matters. And you're spending the first hour saying, oh, she's just a missing person. Let me have another cup of coffee. She'll turn up. No, no, no. You've already
Well,
lost 60 minutes.
let me
Right.
tell you something. I don't know why they would have said any of that because I had inside information from a source who was there.
There you go.
Walked in the front door, said there's two patrolmen who responded to this, who were young and inexperienced. And the person who saw those two patrolmen said, you need to get out of here. There's blood on the floor. The back door's propped open. This is a crime scene, and this is bigger than just responding to a missing elderly person. That's within minutes of arriving. So I
Yeah.
don't know how they ever came up with a story saying, maybe she's walked off. But
Right.
neither
Hey, and
here nor
real quick, if I could
is
go back,
whether or not
sorry,
they're now.
real quick, you said something, and I want to make sure your listeners know. And you're not, when you said, supporter of law enforcement, look, you can, and I am, we both are supporters of law enforcement, but because we question what they're doing does not mean we are bashing law enforcement in any way, shape, or form. All we're asking for is, just some accountability.
3 ransom notes, 3 different answers about whether any of them are real. On Tuesday, an FBI official told Reuters none of them are genuine. 2 days later, the FBI's own Phoenix office said that wasn't the full picture. Some notes, they said, are extortion attempts. Others may still be legitimate. The case, they confirmed, is still being investigated as a kidnapping for ransom. 100 days. An 84-year-old grandmother still missing. Unidentified male DNA sitting in a lab with no name attached to it. A masked man on a doorbell camera who never came back. And on July 3rd, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos said something he hasn't said in months. He believes an arrest is coming. So which is it? Are the notes lies from strangers cashing in on a tragedy? Or is one of them the only real thing anyone's heard from her kidnappers since February 1st? By the end of this, you'll see why even the FBI can't agree with itself. The first theory investigators floated was simple. Elderly woman, confused, wanders from home. It happens. Families search backyards before they search for suspects. But Nancy Guthrie's family shut that theory down immediately. She could not walk to her own mailbox. That single fact should have changed everything in the first hour. It didn't. Every second matters in a case like this, and by the accounts of a source close to the scene, the first 60 minutes were treated like a routine welfare check, not a crime. That source says 2 young, inexperienced patrolmen were the first through the door, and the person who saw them arrive says they were told plainly, "Get out. There's blood on the floor. The back door is propped open. This is not a wellness call. This is a crime scene." That warning, according to the source, came within minutes of the first officers stepping inside. And still, somewhere in that chain, the story that reached the public was a woman who might have wandered off. Before we go further, one thing needs to be said clearly. Questioning how a case was handled is not an attack on law enforcement. It is not disrespect. It is accountability. For an 84-year-old woman who was taken from her own bed in the middle of the night, 5 ransom notes have surfaced since. Not one has led to an arrest. And now the FBI is reportedly saying that every one of those notes may be fabricated. So here is the question that should be keeping all of us up at night. If this was never about money, why was Nancy Guthrie taken at all? Reuters dropped that possibility like a depth charge. According to Reuters, an FBI official says all 3 batches of kidnapping-related messages are believed to be fake. The first note, the second note, and the flood of copycat messages that followed from a third-party offering to expose the real kidnappers for a Bitcoin payment. The first of those original notes arrived on February 2nd. The second came days later, on a Thursday, after Nancy disappeared in the early hours of that Sunday morning, having last been seen the Saturday night before. The FBI official's words to Reuters were direct. None of the ransom notes are believed to be genuine. A second law enforcement source, Reuters reports, confirmed that same assessment, and according to that reporting, the FBI believes the first 2 notes came from a single sender, tied together, investigators say, by matching Bitcoin wallet details and a shared IP address. If that link no longer holds, we are back to square one. Reuters reporting also raises the obvious follow-up question. If none of it was really about Ransom, why abduct her at all? Nothing was taken from the house. Nothing appeared disturbed. The theory answers nothing. It only strips away the one motive that made sense. Who takes a grandmother for no reason? I wasn't willing to leave it at square one, so I went back, not to the noise, not to the tabloid sideshow, but to 5 months of evidence law enforcement has been sitting on. What's there changes how this case needs to be understood. Start with what the FBI's Phoenix field office has said on the record. In a statement, the Bureau said this: the FBI and its task force partners have received several ransom notes over the course of this investigation. Some have been deemed to be extortion attempts without legitimacy. Others, the statement continues, may potentially be legitimate and are still being investigated as such. The case, according to that statement, continues to be investigated as a kidnapping for ransom. The FBI says it will continue offering assistance, but local authorities remain the lead agency. Read that statement closely. Some notes dismissed as fake, others still on the table as potentially real. That is not the same story Reuters told. And there's a third account. Harvey Levin at TMZ, who says he received the notes directly, reports that 2 FBI sources inside the investigation told him the first 2 ransom notes are more likely than not authentic, while the third batch, the Bitcoin extortion messages, are garbage. So now we have 3 versions from 3 sources. Reuters says all fake. TMZ's sources say the first 2 are probably real. The FBI's own public statement says some notes may still be legitimate. Multiple agents, multiple opinions. Even sources close to the case describe disagreement inside the Bureau itself over which notes, if any, are real. But here's what almost nobody is saying out loud. Even if we accept that the first 2 notes came from Nancy's actual abductor, they contain something every real ransom case needs, and this one never had. Proof of life. No photo, no recording, nothing. In every kidnapping for ransom case worth comparing, the demand comes packaged with something that proves the victim is still breathing. That's not optional. That's the entire mechanism of a ransom negotiation. Nancy reportedly had an Apple Watch on her at the time. A location ping, a voice memo, anything would have been simple leverage for someone who actually wanted to get paid. None of that ever came. That is not a negotiation. That reads like a message from someone who already knows she's gone. So if ransom wasn't the motive, what was? Let's talk about the man on the porch. If the notes aren't real, here's what's actually left on the table. Investigators recovered unknown male DNA inside Nancy's home. DNA that, 5 months later, still hasn't been publicly tied to anyone. It could belong to a delivery driver, a visitor from years back, or it could belong to the man who took her. There's been no public update on whether that sample has produced a lead. And there's the Ring camera. You've likely seen it by now. A masked figure, gun in one hand, the other hand fumbling at a vine near the camera housing. He looks unpracticed, almost amateur. Based on an analysis using the same camera model, that vine is narrow enough to wedge directly between the camera and its mounting plate. That is not someone trying to block the lens. That's someone trying, clumsily, to tear the camera down entirely. A desperate attempt to kill the only evidence on that porch, made by someone who didn't come prepared with the right tool. And yet, 5 months. No fingerprint match. No DNA hit. No arrest. No cell phone traffic connecting anyone to that porch. In case after case like this, something eventually surfaces. Here, nothing has. That absence doesn't point to incompetence. It points to something colder than an accident. Unless the fumbling on that porch wasn't the work of an amateur at all, unless it was the one mistake made by someone who got everything else right. I spoke with James Hamilton, a former FBI supervisory special agent with 3 decades of experience in kidnappings, homicides, and organized crime. What he told me is hard to shake. Hamilton believes the people responsible are not from the United States, and that's exactly why no DNA match has surfaced. If they're not in any domestic database, there's nothing for the sample to match. And if nobody local knows them, nobody local is calling in a tip. Hamilton says that, in his view, these are professional criminals, and if he's right, this is the kind of case they may take to their graves. Hamilton's theory points to a criminal group operating out of Central America, one with a pattern of targeting homes near golf courses and wooded trails, easy points of entry and exit. He says that pattern is prolific in the Tucson area, and that Nancy Guthrie's home fit the profile, backed up against a wooded trail, ideal for a quick break-in and a quiet retreat. According to Hamilton, the crew had no idea whose house they'd chosen. They didn't know it belonged to Savannah Guthrie's mother. They expected an empty house. Instead, they found an 84-year-old woman home alone. There was a struggle, blood on the floor, the back door left open behind them, and then, Hamilton says, they did what a professional crew does when a burglary goes wrong. They eliminated the only witness, and they ran south. Hamilton's account is direct. A burglary crew hit the house not expecting anyone inside. She was inside. A struggle followed. It went further than they intended, and she didn't survive it. From there, Hamilton believes they took her body across the border, buried her, and flew home, calculating that leaving a body behind meant leaving DNA behind with it. Now build the case alongside that theory. Nancy Guthrie's home sits less than 70 miles from the Mexican border. The unknown male DNA recovered at the scene has no match in the national database. Not, Hamilton argues, because the science is slow, but because the person who left it has never been entered into an American system in the first place. Then there's the language. The so-called buried with nature ransom note used the word perished instead of died, phrasing that, on close analysis, maps closely onto a Spanish speaker composing a message through Google Translate. To test that theory, I asked a native Spanish speaker to write, from a hypothetical kidnapper's perspective, a compassionate apology for an accidental death. Something meant to say, "I'm sorry, this went wrong, but I treated her with respect and buried her properly." When that Spanish text was run through Google Translate, the English that came back included the exact phrasing from the actual note. "Your mother perished. We buried her with nature." That is not how a native English speaker naturally grieves in writing. That is how a machine translation renders grief out of Spanish. There's one more thread. A tip reportedly came into a Mexican Mothers Search Collective, a group that helps locate missing persons across the border, describing a specific burial location south of the line. That's not background noise. That's the kind of detail that tends to surface from someone with inside knowledge once the money never arrives and the guilt starts to weigh. Now consider something the FBI has not said publicly, but the record suggests. This investigation may have been compromised in its opening hours. According to reporting on the case, the Pima County Sheriff's Department initially treated this as an elderly woman who had wandered off, despite blood on the floor and a door left wide open. The search was called off after 48 hours. No helicopter was brought in. Officials reportedly said there was no ongoing risk to the community, and the scene was released within that same 48-hour window. Sources inside the department have suggested investigators had already zeroed in on a prime suspect, Nancy's brother-in-law, a theory that, according to those same sources, went nowhere and consumed time that couldn't be recovered. While that theory was being run down, the people Hamilton believes are actually responsible may have already been across the border and in the air home. That's not speculation for its own sake. It's consistent, according to Hamilton, with how transnational burglary crews typically operate. Hit, grab, dump, and fly. They don't linger to mail follow-up notes. They disappear. Some of you are already asking the obvious counter-question. What if Savannah Guthrie herself was the actual target? Her profile, her income, a message aimed at her. It's a fair theory, and it deserves real weight. But if this were a targeted celebrity kidnapping, where is the direct demand to Savannah? Where is the call to the Today Show? Where is any communication to the family at all? The notes, instead, went to television stations and to TMZ. Kidnappers pursuing a famous family's money don't typically route their demands through the press. They go straight to the people who can pay. The silence directed at the Guthrie family may be the strongest evidence we have that this was never about them. This looks like the wrong house, the wrong night, and the wrong grandmother. Here's where I need you. Go back and watch the porch footage one more time. Pause it the moment his fingers close around that vine. Look closely at the grip. Is he pulling the camera down, or is he positioning something else entirely? Tell me what you see in the comments below. This community has caught details before that professional analysts missed, and in a case this starved for answers, Every extra set of eyes matters. Here's where the investigation stands. The DNA has been collected. Genealogical analysis is reportedly underway. Flight logs are being checked. Cell tower data is being sifted. Forensic evidence doesn't stay buried forever. It surfaces, and when it does, I'll bring it to you the moment it breaks. If you leave now, that's the update you'll miss. So if you haven't subscribed yet, do that now. And if you want the deeper dives, our membership covers the private sessions we don't post anywhere else. Thank you for watching. Nancy Guthrie's case isn't closed, and neither is this channel. Justice doesn't rest, and neither do we.